If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2Verify.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2Verify. I'm your host for this episode, Jenny Dietrich. Today, we have a very special guest. He's usually the one asking the questions of experts here, but he has stories of his own to tell. Please allow me to formally introduce Arnette Heintze. Arnette is Chief Strategy Officer at S2Verify and is an accomplished entrepreneur. 3 decades before joining the private sector, Arnette worked at the highest levels of federal, state, and local law enforcement, including the Secret Service. As a special agent and a senior agency executive, Arnette planned, designed, and implemented successful security strategies for U.S. presidents, world leaders, and events of national significance. Among the highlights of his career, Arnette was selected in 1998 as the Treasury Department's representative to attend the National War College, an elite program for select military officers and ranking federal civilians, where he earned a Master of Science degree in National Security Strategy. Arnette, I'm so excited to be able to be the one to do this with you. And I've known you for, I'm not going to say how long, for a long time. And you have such a great story about when you decided the Secret Service was the job for you. And I'd love for you to tell that story.
Well, thank you, Jenny. It's really great to be here with you. And it's a little different on this side.
Right?
Yeah.
A little more nerve-wracking, I'm sure.
It is. But it's, I've really enjoyed, my professional career. And I think my background has kept me kind of grounded in where I want to take things in life. So it's been very helpful for me. And if anybody can learn from my experience, that's wonderful. And, but I will tell you, my interest in the field that I'm in, I can actually pinpoint the date and almost the time. And it was June 6th, 1968, probably a little after 5 o'clock. And I'd spent a long afternoon cutting grass in the mobile home park that my family lived in South Louisiana. And, a June day in Louisiana, South Louisiana is very hot. So I'm going to guess the temperature is probably in the mid 90s, maybe even higher. But I came in and for dinner that evening, and my dad watched Walter Cronkite News every night.
Uh-huh.
My dad had retired from the Marine Corps and brought our family back to South Louisiana, where he grew up. He and my mother grew up. So I walked in, and it turns out on that afternoon, that was the date Senator Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And that was certainly a critical time for our nation. And I remember specifically Walter Cronkite saying, and the president has dispatched the Secret Service to protect the remaining presidential candidates. And at the time, there were about 11 or 12 presidential candidates. So not knowing what the Secret Service was, I did like every 13-year-old kid in 1968 would do. I went to Google. And
not so much.
So we know Google wasn't around. But my mother had just purchased a set of World Book encyclopedias. And they had a distinct look and feel. They were kind of cream colored with a green center.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
So I went to the World Book and looked it up, and I immediately decided that's what I want to do. I wanted to get in the Secret Service. I will also tell you that the other assassination that kind of helped frame my perspective was the death of Senator Kennedy's brother, President John Kennedy. And I was in the 2nd grade, but I remember being in school that day, and I remember just the emotional breakdown of every adult around me.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Didn't fully appreciate and understand what was going on, obviously in the 2nd grade. But as when Senator Kennedy was assassinated, it kind of brought back the memories of President Kennedy assassinated. So that was the driving force. So, just to move things forward, I knew I wanted to do that, and I talked about it with anybody that would listen. And then it turns out my best friend in high school, his brother-in-law, who was married to his older sister, was in the Secret Service.
Oh, no kidding. Huh.
Yep. And I got to spend a Christmas Eve talking to him about his job.
Wow.
And that really cinched it, because he was traveling around the world, carrying Uzi submachine guns. And I said, oh yeah, that's the job I want to do.
That's the one for me.
So anyway, his name was Jim Posey, and Jim is still a dear friend today. And he kind of helped guide me through the process of, the application process. And ultimately, I graduated from LSU in the mid-'70s. And at the time, President Carter was president. Interest rates, believe it or not, were at 21%.
Oh, geez. Can you imagine?
And the federal government wasn't hiring much. So I went into local law enforcement, and I spent 7 years into state and local law enforcement, which, frankly, it was probably the best move I could have made before going in the Secret Service, because it gave me some insight, experience of really what true law enforcement is about. And I cherish those experiences I had in state and local law enforcement, worked some tremendous cases. And then finally in January of 1983, I got a call from the agent in charge of the Secret Service in New Orleans. And he said, we've got a job for you if you'd like it. And we picked the date, and I started on February 7th, 1983.
So did you apply for the Secret Service and then waited all that time for them to have an opening?
Wow. You could take it's a very competitive process.
I'm sure.
Apply, you have to take what at the time was called the Treasury Enforcement Exam. And so you had to pass this exam, this aptitude. And I will tell you that the factor that another significant date that drove my career was the assassination attempt of President Ronald Reagan. Because on April 30th, 1981, John Hinckley shot the president. And that prompted Congress with a huge influx of additional funding to the Secret Service to step up hiring. So I was in the very first group of men and women that got hired in the Secret Service in 83. And so that carried us on. And then it really, that kind of shaped my perspective and when I started getting an entrepreneurial spirit behind me, that kind of, it kept me focused to what I needed to do. And I will tell you, in the mid-'90s, I started daydreaming about, getting into business and maybe starting a strategic security firm. And then another date that impacted my decisions was September 11th.
Sure.
And on that day, it really got me thinking. I actually picked up a journal and I started writing down my thoughts and ideas about creating this business. And lo and behold, that's the business I established in 2004. And started it off by myself. It was called Law Secure Strategies, LLC. Then I realized that my philosophy, I wanted to hire men and women from the Secret Service, but I got to thinking we all look alike, act alike, think alike. It's just like
they have the same haircuts.
There's no diversity of opinion of, we all trained in a certain way.
Yeah.
And it brought me to a dear friend that I had met when I moved to Chicago to run the Secret Service of the Midwest. And his name was Terry Hillard, and Terry was the superintendent of Chicago Police Department. And we established a strong professional and friendly relationship. And after we both retired from he retired from CPD and I retired from the Secret Service, he called me asking some questions one day. And I said, Terry, let me give you my business plan and let's form a company. So
do this.
We went to lunch at a now defunct restaurant called the Red Light on Randolph, and had lunch. I gave him my business plan, and we decided to start the company. I said, let's call it Hillard Heintze, because Heintze Hillard doesn't sound right. and we each put $3,000 in, and that's the last money that
No
company ever
kidding.
needed. So,
$3,000 each. That's
yep.
awesome.
And, so Terry stayed with me until 2009, and he wanted to go become a full-time granddad. And he understood that I was trying to build a business and where I was trying to take it. And so Terry went into retirement at that point. And then I continued on. And, around those same times, I had been working with my partners, Jim Zimbardi and Bill Whitford. They were with a company called Choice Point, which Choice Point was the nation's largest background screening company in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And they actually had hired me as an advisor to them. Work.
As the world turns.
And then lo and behold, LexisNexis comes along, buys Choice Point. Those two guys decided they didn't want to stick around for that transition. And then Bill called me one day and said, "Hey, I'm going to start a background screening company. Would you like to join me?" And I said, "Sure, let's do it." So that's how S2Verify was started. And Jim was right there in those early discussions as well.
You were with the Secret Service, 21 years? Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what did you learn about that you're taking forward into this business, S2Verify? What did you learn from that experience about security? And I want to get into some Arnette Heintze stories too, because you have some really great stories there as well. But what did you learn, especially for security for businesses and applying that to background screening and helping HR professionals protect their organizations and their teams?
The central theme that you learn in a career with the Secret Service, the mission is a non-fail mission. If we fail in our mission to protect the president or other dignitaries that we're charged with protecting, the nation is going to have some very traumatic times. So it's really a no-fail mission that you have. And when we look at protecting the president, we're bringing methodology into place. We're bringing a prevention-oriented methodology. And that's the concept that not many security firms bring to their clients because they haven't experienced it. They don't know what it means typically. And it's about managing risk, threats, and vulnerabilities. And so the prevention-oriented methodology will guide you down a process to best control risk, threats, and vulnerability, trying to get them down to zero, but sometimes you can't. And then you're taking the acceptable risk that you're willing to take with that. But our job is to create that environment wherever the president is at that keeps him or her safe.
Well, not her yet. Eventually. We will get there eventually.
We're not far.
So in 1983, they call and they say, "We have a position open for you." But I imagine you don't go straight to the president.
Oh, no. Yeah. No, you start every young Secret Service agent that's hired starts off in a field office. And, in the United States, there's typically a field office in every major city in America.
Sure.
And so I started off in New Orleans. But then a couple of years later, my career took me to Baton Rouge, which was my hometown. And I started an office there with another senior agent, a gentleman by the name of Phil Robertson, and who was a great mentor and colleague that helped me really get my careers grounded well and move forward. And then I transferred into New York City, and New York was our largest office, and tons of experience there. And then I went to the president's detail in December of 1990.
Wow.
And then obviously President Bush was president and served the first 2 years of President Bush, and then President Clinton comes in the office and then served the last 2 years. And then my career took me into headquarters where I worked in what was called the liaison division. And I was the agency's primary representative to the 160 embassies in Washington.
Wow.
So we maintain relationships and with their professionals, and went into our public affairs office. And then I ultimately ran our public affairs office for a number of years. went to the National War College, and then was transferred to run the Midwest of the Secret Service out of Chicago.
The idea that you have had this incredible career and fascinating career, because, there aren't that many of you that have protected the president. And now you went on to build a security firm that you later sold. And now you've built this background screening company with Bill and Jim. The idea that you can protect companies in so many different ways is so incredible. And I think for HR professionals to understand that all of the risks and threats and vulnerabilities that they have inside their businesses can be protected with a company like S2Verify.
They can. It's one element of a security plan, a security strategy of any corporation, I will tell you. Even though HR controls it, manages it, in regards to background screening, at S2Verify, our purpose is to help clients hire with confidence and manage insider risk. So what that translates to is we are confident that individuals that have exhibited bad choices in life that have led to arrest and convictions of certain offenses potentially raise the risk of a company hiring an individual like that. So as an example, if you're in the retail industry and you have a prospective candidate and they seem greatly qualified on all aspects, and then you conduct a background screening of that individual and you find out they've been arrested 3 times for shoplifting and convicted,
probably not.
That's probably not the candidate you want to bring in. And, another example of, when companies put a significant focus on preventing violence in the workplace today, looking at individuals that have arrest and convictions that are recent, meaning 5, 7, 10 years of violence. So if you find an individual that has a history of assault charges, of battery, of domestic violence that is in their background, that's a red flag. That should tell you, wait a minute, what's an individual going through? Or if you see somebody with significant arrests and convictions of intoxicated behavior, whether it's, intoxication or driving while intoxicated, doesn't mean that they're a bad hire. It means that there's a potential your risk is actually elevated.
Right.
So you need, you need to have a decision-making matrix around the individuals that you're looking at to hire. So
as a business owner myself, one of the things that I found the most compelling about S2Verify is this idea of continuous or ongoing screening. Because even if that doesn't exist in the background right now, if you and you hire them, they're a great candidate, you hire them, they're a great employee. If you're not doing ongoing screening, you might miss something that comes in the future.
Well, you're so right, Jenny. So one of the best practices we recommend to our clients and prospective clients is that have a continuous program. And those programs don't have to be so cost burdensome. So there's a way to structure your initial comprehensive background screening check that you want to do. But then there's also a way to set up periodic reviews that don't have to be quite as expensive. And you're checking certain files and systems for records because individuals change in life, right? So on the day you hire a person, say you hire somebody right out of college, 21, 22 years old, and there's no criminal history, no bad records in their life. And then 10 years later, they're still working for you, but you're seeing changes in behavior and you're going, what's going on with that person?
What's going on? Yep.
You don't know.
Yep.
And so having a program that continuously monitors the criminal history information can be crucial to safeguarding a business in the future.
Are there other red flags outside of a criminal arrest record, assaults, convictions, those kinds of things that we should be looking for?
Well, when it comes to protecting the workforce, it's behavior in the workforce. So it's and I can't say that there's a system out there that monitors that sort of.
Sure.
Other than maintaining some vigilance over social media. And if people are active in social media, sometimes they bring their frustrations into that platform and will talk about things that are bothering them at work. But individuals that have a pattern of not only exhibiting bad behavior or anxiety or anxious moments in social media, they'll often talk with work colleagues about a bad boss or a bad work environment.
Right.
And if that there's something that can escalate with that communication, and if you see that communication escalating, that should be a red flag.
Oh, that's such great advice. I wrote that down because, as I said, I own my own business as well, and I've actually been friends with employees on Facebook and see some of the stuff they post, and you're like, you know, I can see that, right? So social media monitoring is really great advice.
Yeah. And, in my prior company, and here's the interesting element about background screening industry. The records that we are allowed to check and provide to the employer for employment decisions, they have to be, they have to follow guidelines that are established by the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
Sure.
And by the EEOC and FTC. And so that there's really specific guidelines, and there has to be releases signed and acknowledgement, and you have to have a resolution process if the applicant disagrees with the findings. So doing something around social media is a different function that I would suggest would not come under typical HR functions, but that maybe your security organization can help you accommodate a legal process for doing something like that.
Are there businesses that are small enough that they don't need to do background screenings before hiring?
No. If you've got an employee, I would tell you,
Everybody.
Even if it's one employee, it's worth doing.
Yeah.
And it's, the great news is the vast majority of the American workforce is good, has clean backgrounds, and it's typically a smaller percentage of the population that you're going to have convictions. And one of the most important things, just because somebody has a conviction doesn't mean that there's not a place in your organization
Sure.
to work with them.
Sure.
And everybody should have a second chance and have an opportunity to make a meaningful living. So it's just, you need to understand what the circumstances were around that and understand what your risk tolerance is to have somebody like that.
Yep. So Arnette, as I mentioned in the beginning, you and I have known each other a long time, and I'm constantly in awe and inspired by you and learn something from you every time we talk. You've reached such pinnacle of success by any stretch of the imagination. And I'd love for you to give some advice to ambitious people who want to follow a similar path, not necessarily go into the Secret Service and protect U.S. presidents, which is great for you, but there's no way that would be something I would love to do.
Yeah.
But a similar path from following your passion and understanding that it doesn't have to be work to work. Like, you can actually work because you love what you're doing.
Obviously, my first passion was around protection and and getting into the Secret Service. But in the mid-90s, when I started thinking about what my next career would be after the Secret Service, because I knew I'd be retiring by the time I was 50, give or take.
Sure.
Then I started reading, and I recognized early on that the consumption of knowledge is the best way to prepare yourself for whatever you have in plan in life. And so the first, I came across a gentleman by the name of Michael Porter. He's a PhD from Harvard, and he's written two really definitive pieces of work, one called Competitive Strategy and the other called Competitive Advantage. And really, those are the fundamental strengths of any business. If you have a strong competitive strategy you understand what your competitive advantages in the market are. So that kind of started shaping my understanding around the need of building strategies. And then, I will tell you, other authors really enhanced that knowledge base that I started building. I discovered a gentleman by the name of Ram Shriram, and Ram has been the advisor to many of the Fortune 500s. And he's got some tremendous articles and books out there on, growing your business. And one of his greatest pieces of work is around the concept of execution, because a lot of companies can have great strategies and great plans. They fail to execute. So understanding that concept around execution is really critical. Then there's guys like Collins, who's written, Good to Great. And a number of his books are just really powerful. Simon Sinek on why. That's another one. So it's what I would suggest to individuals that are trying to figure out their entrepreneurial side and the spirit is just consume everything you can around business, and that can start to shape and probably the best advice I can give any entrepreneur is making sure you got the vision, mission, purpose identified, know your value proposition, really explore the things that are driving you around your core values and beliefs, and bring those to bear in your business. And if you align all of those elements, you're going to have a wonderful business.
Great advice. And I agree on Simon Sinek and Jim Collins as well. So before we sign off, I would like to ask you a question that you ask every guest. If we were to do a background check on you, would we find any surprises?
You would find no surprises.
Oh, come on.
There is no surprise that will jump out from an FCRA certified background, because I've never been arrested. I've never been convicted. And
I would hope not if you're
protecting.
Yeah, I would hope not. You were the police.
My record is still pretty clean, and I think my top secret clearance is still active. So
wow, that's fantastic.
I'm good to go.
That's fantastic. Well, Arnette, thank you so much for opening up about your career and how it has informed your entire career, but also what we're doing with S2Verify. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I know tomorrow, Jenny, you and I are going to spend some time with Jim and Bill, and we'll put them in the hot seat and help.
So fun! I have the best
everybody
job.
Understand why we do what we do. So.
But for our listening and viewing audience, please tune in next week when Arnette will talk with Priscilla Guaso about passion for HR careers and Latinas in HR. Well, see you then, and it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do.
Thank you so much, Jenny.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.